welcome today
Thanks.
for this conversation, and thank you so much for accepting our invite to be our guest today. So tell me, what is science of change? What is change?
The human organism has to change on a regular basis. I mean, like literally daily. But certainly every 7 years, almost every cell in your body goes through a cleansing and refreshing. And for you as an organism to continue to live, you have to get this change process from the mitochondrial DNA all the way up to, your brain and your thoughts. But the same thing is true in our relationships. As anybody who's had a friend for a long time or has been married or has a partner, you know that, if you don't invest in and refresh the relationship, you grow apart and you become divorced one way or another. The same thing in teams and organizations, in countries and communities.
Right.
So while change is essential for life, it's fairly hard to do and it's rare. And it's rare in the sense that people most of the time avoid it as much as they can.
Right.
People feel comfortable in their habits. They don't want to seek social disapproval, so they try to fit in with whatever the norms are. I mean, why else can you have this phenomena of online influencers, people who have little credibility in terms of life success or effectiveness as to whether or not they've got any morals, or standards? That's another questionable issue. But their sole premise is that people look to them for ideas as to how they should live. Means that a lot of people are basically doing regressive things. And in fact, the research on change shows that, 80% of the organizational consulting efforts fail to reach their objectives. Hans Eysenck showed in psychotherapy decades ago in the NHS in England that people who were diagnosed as clinically depressed benefited from psychotherapy for a year. But so did the people who were on the waiting list, and they benefited just as much.
Right.
So the question we have is, if the effect of change, higher education is just as bad. It's horrible. The amount that people retain from 4 years of university or 2 or 4 years of graduate school is abysmal when people actually do the research. And we have to ask humbly, is it likely that the results from coaching are similarly disappointing? And my answer as a scientist is yes. Look, I started coaching executives with that label in 1969. So I've been coaching people for a long, long time. I also was a psychotherapist. So, for most of the 70s, working with alcoholics and drug addicts. So I know the differences, but, I've coached thousands and thousands of people. And yes, I believe I'm effective as a coach. I believe that when I think about my coaching, I think about, it's like my graduate students, people who get PhDs with me. Whenever I think about them, I think about the ones who have gone on to publish great things and teach at phenomenal universities and write great articles and books. I don't think about the legions of others who never published a thing or published one article. So we have a bias built into ourselves. And because the process of coaching is one in which you feel excited and renewed, as I explained, it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, both in the coach and in the client. We have a real high during the experience. But the question is, are the results of it lasting? And while every one of us can point to clients who have changed their lives or changed their relationships, their teams, their organizations, the question is, are coaches doing better than good bartenders? And the honest answer is, we don't know.
Yeah.
Now, that brings me full circle back that with people who are coaches, at least you have good intentions.
Right.
So let's start with the positive. Here are people who get into the business, and most teachers start with the same way. They want to help students grow and learn. Unfortunately, for most teachers, by the time they're into the field for 10 years, they get exhausted,
Mm.
and, they get exhausted with the administrative stuff and the politics and all of these kinds of things. And they lose their sense of excitement about it.
Mm.
Coaching happens to be one of the fields that people move in and out of. As one of my former doctoral students, Han Leo,
Mm.
who just finished her PhD and is taking a faculty position at Assumption College in Worcester, Mass. She showed, because she was studying identity development of professional coaches.
Mm.
And she showed that a lot of people go into coaching because they're having a midlife crisis. You're a teacher, you're a manager, you're a physician, you're doing something else. And then all of a sudden you discover coaching one way or another. And you say, wow, isn't that a nice thing to do? Isn't that a fun thing? Isn't that a better way to contribute to helping people? So you get some training and then you start doing more of it. And she was able to show that this professional identity development, nobody I know of, when they're 18 says, I want to be a coach, unless they're talking about it as an athletic coach. So the coaching field as a role, I think, is reserved for people who find it when other things have lost their excitement. What that means is that very often, if the coach is at the point that the person who is the coach feels that they've lost their oomph, they may just back out of it. So people may self-withdraw. I worry, though, about all of these large organizations that match people. They say they do it digitally. It's bullshit. They're out. A scientific advisory board is one of them. And whether you're talking about BetterUp or Ezra or Coach Hub or any of them, they have a very simplistic algorithm for matching clients and coaches. But they're doing this for, tens of thousands of people all the time. And everybody who's in the field wants to help. So I'm not judging or casting aspersions on anybody's intention. I am, though, posing the question, are we doing it well? Are we doing it in a way where the client is noticeably different a year or 2 years later than they were when they started the coaching? And now, the desired outcomes of coaching can be a change in a person's behavior, which very often people focus on, especially in organizations, towards some more desirable behavior. You're more empathic, you're more of a team player, etc. You're more organized. But it could also be in helping people change their dreams. And in fact, it was in a coaching study group I was chairing of doctoral students and faculty back in 2000 that I started to raise the question whether or not, given my intentional change theory, helping people with their ideal self, their dreams, their personal vision, their sense of purpose and meaning may in fact be a more of an important contribution as a coach than helping them change their behavior. Now we know that's true, that when we focus on specific goals or a specific problem as the context for the coaching conversation, we close the person's mind to change. So a lot of the things that, the certification agencies insist on just is wrong. It's well intended, but it's not right. And in my book, my new book, I talk about how this idea of SMART goals and all that started in the 60s and 70s. Actually, a lot of it started with my former thesis advisor at Harvard, David McClellan's research on achievement motivation. But the whole idea was that goals would really be motivating. Well, we now have the fMRI, the neurological evidence, to say that when you coach somebody to a specific goal, they are closed to new ideas. They're focused. That's what goals do. They focus you. Very often the context for coaching, we show, if you want coaching to have the client be open to new ideas, to you as a coach, to people, to emotions, has to be their vision, their dream, not their goals. So all of the research that I have been doing since the first study I did on helping relationships in spring of 1967 has really been focused on how do we get to sustained desired change? And if there's anything that my years of doing therapy with alcoholics and drug addicts showed is that, the recidivism rates are so depressingly high that if you don't really pose the question about sustainable change, you're getting short-term effects.
Right.
You're getting what in the training industry was documented in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s as the honeymoon effect. People come out of training saying, how is your grandmother doing? And then 2 weeks later, they don't give a shit anymore. They don't think about it. Within weeks, they've reverted to their old behavior. So the challenge that we have as coaches is how do we use a process that helps facilitate sustained desired change in our clients? Now, the fascinating thing is, like I said, our systematic research over the years, all of these, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of doctoral dissertations and then published articles and studies we've been doing at the Coaching Research Lab at Case Western Reserve University. And you held up the book, Helping People Change before. Ellen Van Oosten, one of the co-authors, is director of the lab, and Melvin and I and Ellen started the lab now 12 years ago. But we had started the research on these coaching relationships back in the 90s at school, at Case. And it becomes very clear that some of the things we have as a field suspected, if not said over time, are true. A coach and a client do a lot better if they form a genuine, caring relationship. Look, empathy has been a mainstay of the coaching field forever.
Right.
We published the results of the first 2 competency studies of coaches ever done. See, all the studies up till now have been bullshit because, well, in my view, because they're based on surveys. You ask a whole lot of coaches, you ask clients, what do you think is important in a coach? Well, I showed in my 1982 book, when you did the same thing on managers, who asked managers or their bosses, and then you actually studied what are the competencies of managers that lead to performance improvement, actual performance, you find that half of the things are similar.
Yeah.
The other half aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, 25% of the things identified are opposite to what works. So you realize that opinion or survey-based competency models are on the whole based on fads or prejudice. To do the research against actual change. I've been talking about, everybody in the field talks about it. Everybody who does research on this stuff admits we don't have this data. Well, we now have at least 2 studies. It's not the end all be all. We need a lot more, but we studied what happens, what are the competencies of the coaches that produced significant desired behavior change over 2 years in their clients, as seen by others, not self-assessed. So 360 kind of. And empathy ends up being one of the key competencies. That's no shock. Like I said, we would predict that. Well, we have shown, again, in our studies that having these, we call them resonant relationships, where you have now we've gone further to specify and to measure the fact that the characteristics of these relationships that seem to be the most fulfilling are a degree of shared vision, not goals, vision, dream, sense of purpose, shared caring, shared compassion, and shared energy. It's like I'm sure you have friends where, a couple where one person in the couple loves to go out and dance and go out and do things, and the other likes to stay at home and read. They don't have shared energy.
Right.
And at some point, it leads to conflict, if not them breaking up. There's a similar issue. You need to be resonating with each other. So since 2007, I've had various doctoral students working with me and faculty colleagues studying the qualities of these caring relationships. So caring relationships is important. We know, I think we've gotten further into what designates it, but some of the other aspects of the coaching practice, I'd say the research is helping us to either readjust or just decide, not decide, but conclude that we should take a different approach. Now, I'm sorry, I'm rattling. It's a professorial disease. That's why I said it's a weird question. You asked me about change. I just wrote my 10th book on this, and I've written hundreds of articles, so I can talk for 8 hours.
Right.
So you better interrupt me.
No, I'm really interested to understand more. So when you said coaching as a goal, kind of compartmentalized thinking, the goal, the smart goals in coaching, it blocks the thinking.
Oh, yeah, right,
So
right.
what do you think is the better way in kind of
Yeah,
framing the
vision.
vision?
Vision. I think the context for a coaching conversation and relationship
Hmm.
should be the client's vision.
Hmm.
What are their
Hmm.
dreams? And it's bigger than goals.
Yeah.
See, goals are narrow. If you don't like the word vision, think of dreams.
Hmm.
If you don't like the word dreams, think of purpose.
Hmm.
Think of meaning.
Hmm.
And that's where I think the key issue is. Because I remember in the medical field, if you as a coach take the person's presenting problem as the thing you're going to work on,
Hmm.
you are, it's like you self-diagnosing your illness on the internet.
Hmm.
It's the naive, that are leading the cause, because you don't know whether or not the person is talking about a symptom or the problem.
Hmm.
What we've been able to uncover is that you're not going to get there.
Hmm.
You're not going to discover the thing unless you can get somebody to step back and say, okay, why am I doing all of this? And that's where the juice, and we've actually shown the physiological stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system and parts of the brain that you need to keep going on the change process.
Hmm.
You have to keep revitalizing it.
Hmm.
It comes from the feeling of hope
Yeah.
and caring
Hmm.
that comes from this vision. Goals, because of their very nature, get you to focus. Now, goals are useful in a change process, but very close to the end.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you're in a 6-month coaching relationship with somebody, goals are useful in the last month,
Yeah. Yeah.
not in the first 5.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, because I think when you explore the larger purpose and the vision, is when you will have the right goals decided for yourself. So give yourself some more time to explore that first.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Hmm.
What you're doing is you're sifting through a lot of these other
Hmm.
possibilities.
Hmm.
You said you're broadcasting from Dubai.
Hmm.
Well, and I was just, exchanging emails with one of my former doctoral students who's a faculty member now up for promotion at Bucknell, Udayan Dar, who's from India.
Hmm.
And he and I published quite a few articles, and he's done a lot of amazing research. But one of the things that's very clear is that when people are in what the Kluckhohns had called hierarchical cultures, Geert Hofstadter talked about that too, cultures where there's a high degree and very explicit of status differences. Middle Eastern cultures are like that. Of course, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Indian,
Yeah.
very hierarchical cultures. The U.S. is actually in the middle. The flattest cultures, the most egalitarian, are Australia, New Zealand, and the Scandinavian countries. The U.S. is in the middle. The U.K. is a little more hierarchical than the U.S., and Canada is less hierarchical than the U.S. But in hierarchical cultures, people take the imposition from others in authority, parents, grandparents, teachers, bosses, goals for themselves, and just accept them and say, yes, that's what I should do, without asking the question, is that what I want to do? And in the classic sense, does it ring my chimes? Now, I am not advocating for egocentrism or narcissism, because there's way too much of that in the world today. As you know, we ended the last chapter of Helping People Change. I talked about the fact that, when did selfies become the most popular form of photography? If you want to think about how narcissistic we've become around the world, I'm not talking about being self-centered. I'm talking about tapping into your energy. Because change, to go back to your first question, change requires a lot of work.
Right.
It doesn't happen easily. And that means you have to use self-control. And that means you have to go in and out of stress periods. But when you go into a stress period, sympathetic nervous system, you literally close down. Your peripheral vision goes from 180 degrees to 30, and you start to get in a defensive posture. So if that's what happens and you don't change it, the change process atrophies and stops. It exhausts. It's like watching this source of energy just get depleted, and eventually there's nothing there. Well, it's these moments in my theory, I call the positive emotional attractor, that reinflate the energy. So you have to have the negative to make the changes, but if you don't periodically reinflate, so it turns out that talking about your sense of purpose in your dreams, feeling the emotion of hope builds the energy.
Right.
Feeling caring and love builds the energy. So I talk about the rhythm of change has to be one where if you think about the amount of energy you have inside, you're going like that. So and we published an article on, we call it the Personal Sustainability Index, on a measure that I actually published in the article, but it's also appearing in one of the appendices of my new book, Science of Change. We showed that the more renewal experiences you had during a typical week compared to stress experiences, the more engaged you were, the more satisfaction in your career and job, life, the more resilient you were, the more empathic you were, the less anxious, the less depressed, all of these things. We also showed in a series of studies that the variety of things you did to renew, to fill the energy, were just as powerful in making all these predictions. So the key, I've been saying this since the 70s when I was doing psychotherapy, but the key is not just to do things that are physiologically and emotionally renewing, adding energy, but to have a variety of them. Because if you always do the same thing, it becomes it's called habituated, loses its potency. So going back to the question that led me on this track. So as a coach, as a helping professional, whether I'm a teacher, therapist, cleric, whatever, professor, I have to first pay attention to me. Not because I'm being egocentric, but because we infect other people in 8 to 40 thousandths of a second with brainwaves about our emotional state inside, it is pivotal that we're feeling excited about life. If you approach today's recording by saying, "Oh, just another one of these damn things," I have to schedule 5 a week, and am I getting tired of this? I would feel it. I would feel that you've had it with this, you're bored. I might misinterpret it as you don't like me, but I'm going to feel this. If, on the other hand, you feel like you learn something every time you do one of these interviews and you like the feedback you're getting from your audience, so you actually look forward to them, then I'm picking that up. So the coach, first and foremost, has to think about what's their vision, what's their sense of purpose, what are they doing on a daily basis to add energy? Because the work of listening to someone, what you're doing right now, you're using up a lot of energy. For me to go quiet for a while and let you ask a question uses up energy. If you don't have something that refills this resource, if you will, what happens is at the end of the day, you could barely make it home and pour yourself a glass of wine, or as my Indian friends like to do, a scotch or a cup of strong tea. But that's what I think is the thing that right now, one of the hot themes in the coaching field is supervision. I don't think people really need supervision. I think what they need is somebody to talk to. And whether you do it with a supervisor or you do it, a number of former doctoral students, faculty now at different universities around the world, and I are pushing the idea of peer coaching in groups. We think coaches should form their own peer coaching groups. 5 to 8 of them meet on a regular basis, talk about how it's going. It would have all the benefits to supervision and be free. So that's the first thing. The second thing then is, how do you do that with your client?
So I want to go back to renewed experiences you spoke about. How coaches, what do you recommend for coaches on that? I mean, I'm sure as a human you would like to have those experiences, and then
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
but for
Well,
coaches.
yeah. Well, for coaches in
Mm,
particular, because we have, as professionals, we have all the usual forms of stress
mm,
each day.
mm,
And I'm not just talking about acute stressors.
mm,
I'm talking about annoying stressors. Like when we started this call, I couldn't get my audio
mm,
to work.
mm,
That was an annoying stressor.
mm, mm,
It set up and activated the sympathetic nervous system, both in you and me,
mm, mm,
until we got it resolved. The sum total of those each day leads to a certain high degree of what's called chronic
right.
stress in professionals. Now, because we're in a helping profession, we have what Dave McClellan used to call extra power stress
Mm,
because we feel responsible for other people.
right.
So you add all of that together, and it says that as helping professionals, we need to have higher frequency of renewal activities. So I'm using the word renewal as a replacement for parasympathetic
Okay. Mm, mm,
activation. It's a nervous
mm,
system activation. There's a neural component.
mm,
I'll just use renewal as
mm,
simplified form. In the Personal Sustainability Index, we pulled from the medical published literature and the psychological literature 18 things that in a typical week will invoke stress for people,
mm,
and mild to high, but in a typical week. So I didn't include divorce on that list,
mm,
although it's often in the list of stressors because it doesn't happen typically for people,
mm,
not each week at any rate.
mm,
There are things that stimulate the compensating system, the parasympathetic,
mm,
which I call renewal. We identified 17 of those. So the question is basically the activities that have had 5 or more published empirical studies in medicine or psychology that show they activate renewal.
mm,
Meditation really helps. Even 15 minutes
mm,
a few times a week helps. Yoga
mm,
helps. Tai Chi helps.
mm,
But it's the centering parts of Tai Chi, not the kick
mm,
ass, that does the stress. Prayer helps,
mm,
caveat, especially if you're praying to a loving God.
mm,
If you're praying to a vengeful God, it tends to stimulate the stress system.
mm,
Exercise helps if it's moderate.
mm,
Now, moderate varies by the person.
mm,
One of my current doctoral students, who's a former retired Air Force officer, she runs 5 to 10 miles every day. If I ran a quarter of a mile, I'd be gasping for breath and, calling for a defibrillator. So for her to run 2 miles is simple.
mm,
It's moderate for her. For me, to walk a mile would be moderate.
mm,
So moderate exercise is variable. Then we know that feeling hopeful about the future helps, and that works individually or together.
mm,
That's why talking about dreams with other people helps because you're feeding into each other's sense of hope.
mm,
It's also why you shouldn't watch the news on TV.
right.
Helping people, being in a loving relationship helps.
Mm,
Helping people in the community who are less fortunate.
mm,
Helping the elderly helps. I'm talking about, again, different sets of studies. That's why I always say to my graduate students, helping your elderly professors will get you closer to heaven. Having a dog, cat, or in some parts of the world, horse or monkey really helps
yeah.
because it's been now shown in many studies that the petting
Mm,
doesn't work with birds or fish, but when you pet them,
mm,
it sets it off in you and in them.
mm,
In more recent studies, in the last 6, 7 years, enough studies have shown that laughing and playfulness helps.
mm, mm,
Dancing and playing music, not just listening to it, but actually playing it or dancing really
yeah.
helps. A walk in nature helps. There might be other things that work for a person,
Right.
and there are some gender differences and some cultural differences, of course, but I'm talking about the ones that work for every human being,
Right.
regardless of gender, culture, race,
Right. And depending upon the interest,
faith,
right, of a
whatever.
person, it will vary in terms of what experience do I get out of it, right?
Yes, I would say that's right.
Mm,
So I think that listening to music is a good example.
mm,
The reason that listening to music doesn't always do it is different music affects different people differently. Plus, when you change,
mm,
I mean, if you had asked me 50 years ago,
mm,
or let's go back even further, 60 years ago,
mm,
when I'm a freshman at MIT, if you had said, will you find a sense of inner peace listening to Nessun Dorma's aria from Turandot or Va Pensiero,
mm,
Verdi's aria from Nabucco, I would have said, you got to be kidding. Talk about something that sounds boring.
yeah,
And yet today, I mean, those, if I have the music on behind me when I'm working, when those arias come on, I stop what I'm working on and just float
yeah,
with it.
yeah.
But yes, that can do it for people. We also know that having loving moments with family, your
Mm,
family does it.
mm,
Playing
mm,
with children
mm,
does it,
mm.
just like playing with pets.
So, Richard, the question that I have is, even a coaching experience can be a renewal experience for people, right? Yeah,
Yes, for both the coach and the
yeah,
client.
yeah.
But it depends on what you're
Right.
doing. I mean, one of my former doctoral students who actually wrote a whole book on this, because her thesis was on somatic awareness from coaching.
Mm,
Mandy
mm,
Blake. She specializes in helping people build somatic, awareness of what's going on in your body
mm,
during coaching. She opens every coaching interaction that she has with people with deep breathing exercises,
mm,
because deep breathing is one of these things
mm,
that has been shown to, I mean, if you practice it,
mm.
a minute or two of deep breathing can flip your hormones.
Yeah, interesting. So I think that's where our responsibility is also as a coach, that
Right.
are we making this experience as a renewal experience, or are we making it as a stressful
Yeah.
one?
So let me use another
Mm,
example. I stopped coaching a few years ago, anybody except my various graduate students. But most of my students are in their 40s or 50s. But um, when I was coaching executives, I would work with them. I mean, they would come in with a presenting problem, and I'd ask them what that was. But my rule of thumb was do not spend more than 2 to 4 minutes talking about it. And then I would say to them quite literally, okay, we're going to work on that. But before we get there, I want to understand the big picture of you.
mm,
I want to understand you.
mm,
And we started working on the vision
mm.
and did have reflective exercises to do at home, and that we have actually in the book, in the Helping People Change and in some of the earlier books. But the idea is I wouldn't let them go on. So for some people, after one or two coaching conversations, they've got a great vision. It's comprehensive, it's compelling. It deals with everything from physical and spiritual health to contributions to the community. That's what I mean by comprehensive. And then we'd kind of go on. For others, I'd spend 3 months working on their vision because they were having trouble getting there. Every time I would have a session, whether it was every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I would open with update me on your vision. Has, kind of anything changed? Now, I'm not doing that because I think their vision has changed. I'm doing it because I want them to feel hopeful
Right,
at the beginning of the coaching session.
right.
And when they go back to their vision and
Mm,
they just talk about it for a few minutes,
mm,
that's all it
mm,
takes, a few minutes with me, they're reminding themselves. And all of a sudden that becomes, as I said, the context.
mm, mm.
And because it's the vision, it feels meaningful, deep sense of purpose. It activates hope and this renewal.
And I think that's a good start in terms of not focusing on the problem, and
Right.
rather than looking at.
Right. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine what it'd be like? And in the 70s, when I was training psychotherapists, I used to have this argument with people who taught psychotherapy, anywhere, that it's not empathetic to keep asking somebody about how they feel about their problems.
Yeah.
It's actually pulling them down into the quicksand.
Mm,
It's horrible.
mm.
So if instead of asking about your vision and has anything changed around it, if I said, now come on, tell me how your relationship with your teenage daughter is
mm,
these days, which almost nobody has a positive relationship with their teenagers,
mm,
period,
mm,
periodically, period. Or if I said, tell me about how your relationship with your in-laws is going, what's going to happen? Or your boss.
mm,
How is your crappy boss doing right now?
mm,
I mean, it just it sends you off
mm,
onto this tangent,
mm, mm.
which is negative.
Yeah, yeah. And you solid,
And there is a place for that
yeah,
in the change process,
mm,
but not as the
right.
context.
Yeah. And I think that solidifies their negative emotion rather working on their positive vision or the personal vision, as you said in the book. Richard, I want to learn from you in this conversation about intentional change theory, because a lot of people talk about it.
Bless you.
Tell me, I mean, from horse's mouth, talk to me a little bit about what
Yeah.
is that theory, where we want to start from.
The earliest version of what I now call my intentional change theory started in spring of 1967. Dave Kolb and I started working on this theory. So it's gone through a bunch of metamorphosis, but fundamentally it has 10 principles. One is that you need to understand complexity theory to understand change, individually or in organizations, because change is almost always discontinuous and nonlinear. So, quick example, almost everybody thinks that a normal distribution, one of these bell curves, is how performance is distributed or change is distributed. Some people change a lot, some people don't change. That's not true. If you actually test it, people's performance is a power curve. Their change is a power curve. That means that very few people actually do perform or change, and they account for most of the results. Now, so the idea of discontinuity and nonlinearity becomes very important, because if you don't appreciate it, which is a key part of my theory, you won't understand, you won't have the patience to understand and appreciate when a moment called emergence occurs, when there's a blast of a person's conscious awareness. Second part of intentional change theory, the process of sustained desired change goes through 5 sets of discoveries of these moments of emergence. The first one being the ideal self. And the next discovery is, how do you come across to others? What I call the real self. Not what you think of yourself, but how do other people experience you? The third is, what's your agenda for the future? How are you going to get from here to closer to your vision? The fourth is, are you experimenting and changing, trying things? Trying things is the operative word. The fifth is, do you have the relationships, the resonant relationships that allow all of this to keep going? The next principle in it is that it is moments of this positive versus negative emotional attractor, these two attractors we have going on inside of ourselves all the time, that sparks your ability to move to the next discovery. And without that, you get stuck.
Yeah.
That's why most change doesn't happen. It's not because people don't have a desired direction. It's because they're not having these renewal, these PEA moments. Those are 7 of the principles. The last 3 are that mine is the only fractal theory, multi-level theory of sustained desired change. So I think the process of sustained desired change in dyads or teams or organizations or communities or countries is exactly the same as I just described. It's not isomorphic. It's not similar. It's exactly the same. And then within that, there are 2 factors that help move the emotions and information across levels. One are resonant leadership relationships. It's not just resonant relationships, but resonant leadership relationships and social identity groups. Now, social identity groups can help or hurt, but that's a part of the dynamics of it. Those are the 10 principles of intentional change theory. What makes it different? Well, first of all, there are a lot of models out there that aren't theories. In science, a lot of consultants or even professors put up models on a board, boxes and arrows, and they imply causality, but it's coming out of their heads. So the question is, it becomes a theory when it's presented in a way that's testable so you can verify or show it true or false. And if you can't test it, then it's unknowable. It's not a theory anymore, it's an opinion. And the problem is, if you only look at, let's say, positive examples, you and I started talking about that at the beginning. If you only think about the people that you helped a lot, but you don't put it to an empirical test, blind to your preferences or your hopes, that what happens is you run into what are called type 2 errors. So you start to think something's working when in fact it's not.
Yeah.
Or it's not for
Yeah,
everybody.
because you're not verifying it, right? It's not verifiable.
That's right. You're not putting it to a test. So I think my theory is the only theory that really posits the psychophysiological processes, because I think that they are happening. It's so fast. It's not like your emotions lead to your brain, or your brain activation leads to emotions. They're all happening, in thousandths of a second. So a lot of other people have theories that they relate to some physiological, but they don't see it as a part of it. Secondly, I think my theory has put this thing about vision, about dreams, about sense of purpose and meaning in the forefront as the driver of sustainable change in a way that some other theories do, but most don't. I also, as I said, mine is the only fractal theory, because that ends up being important. I remember when I was treating alcoholics, I knew that if we only worked with the individual and we didn't work with their family or their coworkers, they'd be back drinking in 6 months.
So it's more systemic view.
Yeah. And when you're coaching, if you only think you're coaching a person, it's not going to be sustainable. You have to work with the multiple levels in some way, some manner.
And how do you do that as a coach? I mean, let's say the client is there in front of you, but how do you really understand the multiple levels of a person?
It's not just understand. How do you interact with the multiple levels? How are you collecting data from the multiple levels? I mean, if you ask me, I'm a very flexible person. Ask my wife. She'll give you a somewhat different answer. She'll say I'm flexible on some issues, but on other issues I'm not at all. So how do you get that cross-check? So the challenge is that some people are more creative. They do, for example, I've known a number of executive coaches who charge several $100,000 a client because they do a lot of shadowing. They go with them to work for a whole day or two here and there. Well, without seeing the person in their setting, how are you getting data about how they're acting or how other people are reacting to them? Without having the person, sometimes you can give the client assignments where they have to go and interview people and then bring back what they said. Not their version of what they said, but actually what they said. So I think there are a variety of techniques, but I don't think the whole field of coaching has done a good job of experimenting with these ideas. And we have to.
Right. And I think that's a need as well now, because it's a complex system that everybody's living in.
That's right.
Richard, you've spoken so much about coaching. How do you look at mentoring? What's your perspective on mentoring?
In the fields of coaching and mentoring, people like to make a big distinction out of it. In practice, they're almost the same thing. So yes, when we use the word mentoring, we tend to refer to a relationship that tends to focus more on instrumental actions, introducing me to a network, opening a door for a job, getting me an invitation to this meeting, giving me advice. And very often when we use the term mentoring, we're referring to something that's very long-term. This person has been a mentor of mine for 20 years. Most of the time when we refer to the role of coaches and the process of coaching, we're talking about relationships that last 6 months, a year, 2 years. And they tend to be more focused on certain things,
mm, mm,
but much more relational, much less instrumental
in coaching, right?
in coaching.
Mm,
Now, the reality is the people that I know that do any of those things well
mm,
are doing both of those things.
mm,
So I'm not sure the distinction is as extreme as we think, but
mm, mm, mm. Right. So, what would you advise new practitioners who are getting into coaching and mentoring field, uh, who are our graduates most of the time? I mean, they're listening to our podcast. What would you advise them as practitioners?
eat a lot of fruit and vegetables.
Mm, mm,
Okay, seriously. I would advise them to, once they finish their whatever they go to get the basic training,
mm,
knowing how to listen, knowing how to ask powerful questions, all that kind of stuff. I would say, I would recommend that they form a study group
mm,
or a peer coach. Technically, it's a peer coaching
mm,
group, but a group of people who are like minded, of relatively equal,
mm,
not necessarily age, but relatively equal experience or status, who want to get together,
mm,
once every 2, 3 weeks for, a 2 hour lunch or a long dinner
mm,
and just help each other out with life and work.
mm,
That really helps. Two, I would recommend that they set aside some of their earnings to attend a course that teaches them a different approach to coaching and do a course every year.
mm. So,
And most of these courses are 7-day
mm,
workshops or online. It's, kind of equivalent.
mm,
But think that you have to keep renewing your ideas
mm,
because eventually you come up with the eclectic approach or style that's yours.
mm. And that takes an ongoing learning, right? It's not just one training and you're done with it. It's ongoing
Yeah,
practice.
that's right. Yeah, so those are two things. The third, then, which actually ends up being the first, is this thing about practicing renewal yourself.
Mm,
So you're staying refreshed,
mm,
you're staying excited,
mm,
because you're going to infect your clients with your feelings.
mm,
Whether you think you're expressing them or not is baloney.
mm,
It's the automatic from the limbic part of the brain to the other person's brain.
mm,
So those would be the three things that I would
mm.
think are important.
Right. And thank you for that advice, Richard. If people would like to get in touch with you, and do you do some webinars and trainings and all of that for coaches?
Every week.
Okay.
um, I appear on other people's webinars or I do interviews like
Mm,
this. This week you're the only
mm,
one, but because this is the kind of for us the peak of summer.
mm,
But most of the time I'm doing 2 to 4 of these a week. But if somebody wanted to get directly in touch with me, then it's my email.
mm,
It's richard.boyatzis@case.edu. And if you go to Case Western Reserve University in the Weatherhead School of Management,
mm,
look me up, you'll also find my email.
mm,
So that's one issue. Second, if people want to learn more about these ideas,
mm,
then I think that, especially for coaches, my last two books, the most recent, The Science of Change, and the one before that, Helping People Change. Helping People Change is really written for
mm,
practitioners. The Science of Change is written for scholars and advanced professionals.
mm,
So there's a difference in the writing style and tone. If a person wants even more, they want to get into skill building, we offer a number of certificate workshops,
mm-hmm,
7-day workshops at my
mm-hmm,
university in these specific techniques that we talk
mm,
about that come out of our research.
mm,
Because we have a coaching research lab based there. So we're always feeding the latest research into training coaches. And then, of course, at the highest level of, if people wanted it, we have a master's in leading organizational change that has one residency in Cleveland. It's a 15-month program, one residency for 5 days in Cleveland, one in Europe for 5 days, and the rest is online. But I teach in that program, and a number of the faculty that are Ellen Van Oostenhuis
mm.
is the director of our coaching research lab. She teaches in it,
Mm.
and others.
All right. Thank you, Richard. I think for this conversation today was wonderful
Good,
to have a
Harris.
conversation, and I'm looking forward to connect again.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.